What is the last item you bought because you saw a television commercial for it? Now think about it. You're watching TV, maybe you're streaming something on one of these free channels that still have ads, and an advertisement pops up for a product. Have you been convinced to go out and buy that product? Probably not. Anymore these days, it seems like advertisement is more for brand recognition and just the repetitiveness of it. Because the more you hear something, the more you see something, the more likely you are to give your money to that company or buy that product. It's just how it works. But it seems like television advertisement has become less and less effective over time. Probably the most effective way that has gotten me to make purchasing decisions is word of mouth recommendations from a friend, from a family member, from somebody I trust, somebody whose input I value, somebody whose recommendations I take to heart and really look into and consider trustworthy. For instance, this is my favorite travel mug. It's nothing too special. It's a Stanley. You can pick them up at Walmart. You can get them on Amazon, whatever. This is not a paid advertisement at all. I got this at kind of the recommendation of the preacher I used to work with up in Illinois. His name is Lance, and he had this very similar coffee mug to this, the Stanley brand. It's steel, it's insulated, it's got this one-handed drink mechanism to where you just push a button and the mouth hole opens. And I usually have coffee in it, but I've got tea, lemon tea with honey in it right now because I'm feeling a little sick. Not like that kind of sick, but just a cold, congestion, allergies, whatever. But I never have to worry about this spilling. The drink will stay hot, not just like warm, but actually hot for hours. I've left this in the car, about half filled with coffee, and I'll come back, take a sip, and it's like it had been poured, 30 minutes ago. I love this thing. I take it everywhere. It is my go-to travel mug if I need to take a hot beverage with me on the go. And I got this at the recommendation of my friend Lance. You'll see behind me a poster. I don't know if you can make it out on the video, but it's a poster of Middle-earth. Yes, Lord of the Rings. When I was in, junior high, that's when the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out. But my best friend had been reading the book, and he recommended that I read them too. He just kept raving and going on about how good they were and how much fun it was to read them. So I read them and watched the movies, and now I'm hooked. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. One book that I've recommended to people and was recommended to me by the preacher that I used to work with here at the church, Alan Burris, many of you know him, The Blue Parakeet by Scott McKnight. I had never read any of Scott McKnight's stuff, but a youth minister that I interned with had this book. Alan was a huge Scott McKnight fan, so I picked up this book, read it, and my goodness, it really changed and shaped the way I read the Bible. And I've recommended this to people, and I've lent it out too, because it's just that good. Some of you know me. You know that I'm an Apple guy. I'm a Mac guy. I don't particularly like Windows and PCs anymore. And I used to not be that way. But I had some friends back up in Illinois where we used to live that were big into Apple products. And they even had their own Apple MacBook repair service and reselling service, and I never was able to buy my own while I was there, but coming here, I needed a new laptop, so I got a MacBook, and it has changed my life. I love Mac OS. I love it so much more than Windows. It's just a personal preference, not slamming any PC people out there, but I love Mac OS. I love the Apple ecosystem. You can tell I'm wearing an Apple Watch. I use an iPad. I use my iPhone to record this video on. And at their recommendation of these friends that I trusted and liked, I looked into it and I got hooked. Just recently, through all this process of having to do more video recording instead of being in person, our current preacher, Tim, saw the capabilities of recording video on my iPhone. That's what we used as our main camera source. And he was so blown away that he went out and bought his own iPhone recently and upgraded from the phone that he had. This is not necessarily a product recommendation for you, but it just goes to show that I and you are probably a lot more convinced to make certain decisions based on the recommendation of people we trust, rather than seeing an advertisement on TV or scrolling through Instagram and seeing it pop up, rather than scrolling through the user reviews on Amazon or whatever other website. You and I are most likely to make a purchasing decision by a word of mouth recommendation, which brings us to the section in the Gospel of John that I want to look at today. We're finishing out chapter 1. There's a lot of intro stuff, okay? So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. And feel free to share this around on your Facebook, social media sites, what have you. Again, word of mouth recommendation. So if you're following along in your Bibles, this is John chapter 1, verses 35 through the end of the chapter. The next day, John was there again with 2 of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the 2 disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" And they said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the 2 who heard what John had said and had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah," that is, the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You're Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated as Peter. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" Nathanael asked. "Come and see," said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." "How do you know me?" Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree, before Philip called you." Then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus said, "You believe because I told you, I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that." And he added, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." So this is Jesus getting his first disciples. The relationship between a rabbi and his disciple was very similar to what we might think of as maybe an apprentice and a master. Disciple just means student. Rabbi means teacher. But it's more than that. It's more than just going and sitting through an hour lecture once or twice a week. It was almost job shadowing. You became a disciple of the rabbi whom you wanted to be like. There would be a lot of times a pretty strenuous application process to become a disciple of a particular rabbi. You had to go to that rabbi and say, "I want to be your disciple." And that rabbi would test you and grill you with questions. And if you proved worthy enough, if you were smart enough, if you were clever enough, if you had a sharp enough understanding of the scriptures, then he might say, "Come, follow me and be my disciple." And from that point on, you would follow your rabbi. Not like follow on Twitter, not like follow on Instagram, but like in real life. Everywhere the rabbi went, you would go. You were like the lamb to Mary. One common phrase, one common blessing was, "May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi." In other words, the dust kicked up from the feet of your rabbi will cover you as you walk along the road behind him, as you strive to be like him. Disciples wanted to to think and talk and act like their rabbi, to eat like their rabbi, to pray and to worship like their rabbi. They wanted to do life like their rabbi. So it was a pretty strenuous application process in determining who could and who could not be a disciple of a particular rabbi. Jesus doesn't do any of that. It's interesting that none of these guys was good enough to be some other rabbi's disciple. Yes, here we'll see, and we'll get into this in just a moment, but Andrew and another disciple were John's disciples at first, but John never claims to be a rabbi. It wasn't quite the same. It was probably more like these schools of prophets that we see pop up sometimes in the Old Testament, where you'd have a gathering of men who would kind of sit at the feet of this prophet and learn from him and learn the kind of the skills of prophesying. It's kind of this weird dynamic that happens. But we see that a few times throughout the Old Testament. It was probably a little bit more like that than a true disciple and rabbi relationship. So here's John, and he sees Jesus coming, and he says to his disciples, "Look, the Lamb of God." And they left John and started following Jesus. Here we see word of mouth recommendation by someone you trust, pointing you to Jesus, saying, "Hey, check this guy out." When the two disciples heard him, they turned and followed Jesus. And Jesus asked them probably the first and most important question we each need to ask ourselves. What do you want? What do you want? He asked that question to many people throughout his ministry. He asked a question to a lame man, "Do you want to be made well?" He asked some blind beggars following, "What do you want?" To which they replied, "We want to see." Later on, we'll see this crowd had gathered and Jesus fed them. The feeding of the 5,000 is one of the miracles in the Gospel of John. And yet they continued to follow him. And he basically has this question like, what do you really want? Do you want just another meal? Is that what you're here for? Or do you want the true food from God? What do you want? That's a question that each one of us has to answer for ourselves. What do you want? For Paul, he made it very clear in his letter to the Philippians. He says, "I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection, to share in his suffering, to join with him in a death like his, so that somehow I may receive a resurrection from the dead like his." I want to know Christ in all his fullness. That's what Paul wanted more than anything else in the world. What do you want? Do you want fame? Do you want fortune? Do you want the comfort of knowing that you can get your get out of hell free card? Are you following Christ just so that you won't go to hell? Are you following Christ just for the blessings? Are you following Christ just for these externals that you can get? Just for belonging in a group of people? What do you want? I love their answer. Check this out. "Rabbi, where are you staying?" That's all they wanted. Where are you staying? I just want to be with you, Jesus. I just want to be with you. It's enough for me to just be in the room. They don't want to have the attention on themselves, but they want to be where Jesus is. And I think as his disciples, that's a good starting point. What do you want? I want to be where Jesus is. And then listen to what he says. Come and see. Come and see. So they went and saw where he was staying and spent the day with him. That's what they wanted. Where are you staying? Come and see. What would you give to spend a few hours with Jesus this afternoon? Wouldn't that be awesome? I wonder what we would talk about. Verse 40, Andrew, Simon's brother, was one of the two that heard what John had said and followed Jesus. Okay, so we know Andrew was one. Who was the other one? There were two disciples of John's that followed Jesus at John's recommendation. We have Andrew. Who was the other? Well, John the apostle, John the author, never really refers to himself by name throughout the gospel. So if we have this unnamed disciple, it's very likely, again, not 100%, can't be 100% sure, but it's very likely that this was John himself, that this was a young teenage John who was hanging out with Andrew, Peter's younger brother, We know from other gospel accounts that the four of them knew each other. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Those are the first four always mentioned. Those are the first four that were called in the other gospels. And so here we have Andrew and probably John. And Andrew goes to get his brother. I love that about Andrew. We don't know a lot about Andrew, Peter's brother, but every time we see him, he's bringing somebody else to Jesus. He's bringing Peter. He's bringing the boy that had that sack lunch at the feeding of the 5,000. He's the one that went and got him and brought him to Jesus. Every time we see Andrew, he's bringing someone to Jesus. I love that. But listen to what he says. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah." And he brought him to Jesus. The Messiah. We found him. After all this time, we found him. Imagine the joy, imagine the excitement that might go on with that. Say you've grown up in these Jewish communities. You've grown up hearing the stories from the scriptures. You've heard and read and maybe even memorized God's promise, his covenant with David, that one would come, that he would have a son that would have an eternal throne in Jerusalem. Imagine reading, for instance, Psalm 110 about the Lord said to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstools, and I will make you forever a priest in the order of Melchizedek." This idea of the Messiah is going to come. Or the prophecies from Isaiah, like Isaiah chapter 9, that he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Prince of Peace, Everlasting Father. All these things that we've been waiting for so long are happening now. This is it. We got to get on this thing. We found the Messiah. We found the anointed one. We found the one who God would promise would come and set things right and deliver us and assume the throne. We found him. Oh my goodness, imagine the excitement. So he brought Peter to Jesus, or he brought Simon to Jesus, and Jesus looked at him and said, "You're Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas," which when translated is Peter. So Jesus does something that God had done earlier in the story of Israel. We see in Genesis 17, God changed the name of Abram, which means something like exalted father, to Abraham, which probably means father of many. And then we see in Genesis 32, we see Jacob, whose name means heel grabber or deceiver. God changes his name to Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. After that night that he spent on the banks of the river wrestling with God or a messenger from God, we're not really sure. So name changing is important in the story and the history of God's people. And here, Jesus changes the name of Simon to Peter. Now, that could have been like a nickname, but from here on out, he's known as Peter. And so even if it isn't a nickname, it's a nickname that's stuck. And it's a nickname that means rock. Now, if you know the story of Peter, if you've read the Gospels and you know Peter, you probably know where I'm going with this. He was anything but a steady, stable rock. He was all over the place. He was hopping out of the boat to walk to Jesus one moment, and then he was sinking down the next and had little faith. He was proclaiming that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, one moment, and then the next, Jesus is calling him Satan. We see him at once say, "I will never deny you," and then when push comes to shove, he denies Jesus 3 times. Peter was, I don't want to say unstable, but he wasn't very steady. He wasn't very steadfast. He was not a rock. He was not a pillar in the Gospels. That wouldn't come until later. In the book of Acts, we see him really kind of come into his own. So even from this very first encounter, we see Jesus knowing something of Peter, knowing that there would come a time where he would live into this name that was given to him. That maybe right now, he is not the rock. Right now, he might not be steady and steadfast and unwavering in his faith, but there would come a time when he would be. Jesus saw this potential within Peter, just like he sees potential within each of us. And then we see 2 more disciples. It says the next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee, which is up in the northern part of Israel. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." So here, again, we see Jesus kind of breaking the traditional conventions of a rabbi and disciple relationship where the disciple would go to the rabbi and say, "Hey, let me follow you." Here, Jesus seeks out Philip and says, "Follow me." And he does. Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Bethsaida was a small fishing village right off the coast of the Sea of Galilee. At least several of the disciples were John's disciples first, and kind of from the same hometown. But they were nobodies. They weren't the elite. They weren't anything special. Jesus starts out his ministry by calling these average Joes to be his disciples. And it's these average people that he would use to change the world. So Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Remember back to last week, we talked about who John the Baptist is, and they asked him these questions: are you the Messiah? Are you Elijah? Are you the prophet? And he denies all of those. But now Philip comes along and goes to find his buddy Nathanael, who's also probably another name for Bartholomew. Of the Synoptic Gospels, when they're listing out the disciples, would mention Philip and Bartholomew. Bartholomew is a surname, or a last name as we might think of it. It's son of Ptolemaeus, and that's kind of the name he went by in the Synoptic Gospels. Here we see maybe his first name, Nathanael. So, same person. So Philip went and found Nathanael. "We found the one Moses wrote about." Maybe the prophet. "We found the one that the prophets wrote about, like Isaiah, and like all these other prophecies we see throughout the Hebrew books of prophecy. Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nazareth. Can anything good come from there? Ooh, that's a slam. Okay. Them's fighting words, as some might say. I mean, we all know these kind of rivalries. So they're from the small town of Bethsaida, on the coast, right off the coast of the Sea of Galilee. Nazareth was another really small town, and you know how small town rivalries can get. But whereas Bethsaida might have been a fishing village, Nazareth was more of a blue collar, maybe a little bit more construction oriented. We know that Joseph was a carpenter. Well, we've come to find that that word carpenter might actually be stonemason. Regardless, it's safe to say that Joseph was in the construction business, and Jesus was as well. Isn't this Jesus the carpenter? People would ask. Same word. So isn't this Jesus the construction worker? And so Nazareth was probably another small, what we would consider blue collar, working class, construction type of town. Not that far away from Nazareth, there was another city, a bigger city, in which right during the time of Jesus' upbringing, when he would have been in his teens or 20s, there was a huge coliseum built, a theater. And it's very likely that Jesus and Joseph and some of the other men from Nazareth would have worked on that construction site because they would have been local labor. They would have probably been contracted out to work at a place like that. It's very likely. Nazareth, can anything good come from there? It's a small, working class, backwater, middle of nowhere type of town. Nobody comes from Nazareth. Nobody moves to Nazareth. Like, it's just not even a blip on the radar. It's a place where you would pass by and there might be a gas station to stop at on your way to a bigger town. We all know what this is like, the kind of rivalries, right? Where I live in Mitchell, Indiana, super small town. But somebody from Bedford, a bigger city north of here, might say, can anything good come out of Mitchell? And we might say something like, can anything good come out of Orleans or Shoals? Like, you know how it is. Kind of the buck gets passed down the line. Nathaniel, I love this. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's just really funny. Come and see, said Philip. There it is again. Come and see. Just come experience it for yourself. If you don't trust me, if you don't trust my word, just come and see. Just try it. Just give it a try. So when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." That's probably a reference to this idea among the Hebrews of being a righteous person. Joseph, Jesus' father, or earthly father, was said to be a righteous man. A man of integrity, a man who lives up to his word, a man who follows the law. He's a good citizen, he's upstanding. Nobody can really say anything bad about him. So here's Nathanael totally dissing Jesus' hometown of Nazareth, and then he approaches Jesus and it says, "Here's a man in whom no deceit is found." So is Jesus saying that he's right about Nazareth and how terrible of a city it might be? It's just funny. "How do you know me?" Nathanael asked. That would be really strange. This is a really weird interaction. How do you know me? You don't know anything about me. How can you say this about me? Jesus answered kind of cryptically, and we'll talk about this here. "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." What? What does that mean? And that got me thinking, have you seen the musical Hamilton? If you haven't, what are you doing with your life? Get your Disney Plus subscription and go watch it right now. Pause this video and then come back to it. Okay, did you watch it? Good. You might have caught this reference then. In the song One Last Time, where Washington is leaving and Hamilton is having this discussion with him, and Washington is not running for re-election. He's limiting himself to 2 terms. Washington says this, "If I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone. Like the scripture says, everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. They'll be safe in the nation we've made. I want to sit under my own vine and fig tree, a moment alone in the shade, at home in this nation we've made, one last time." Oh, I get chills just even thinking about that. It's such a good song and such a great moment. And such an interesting reference. It's like a really deep cut into the Old Testament scriptures, because this idea of the fig tree is mentioned several times. Look at this. 1 Kings 4, verse 25. "During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel from Dan to Beersheba lived in safety, everyone under their own vine and under their own fig tree." Proverbs 27:18. "The one who guards a fig tree will eat its fruit, and whoever protects their master will be honored." Micah 4, verse 4. Like I said, these are some pretty deep cuts. "Everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken." And then finally, Zechariah 3, verse 10. "In that day, each of you will invite your neighbor to sit under your vine and fig tree, declares the Lord Almighty." So this idea of while you were sitting under your own fig tree, I saw you. Could it be that at the moment Philip came to find Nathanael, maybe he found him under a literal fig tree? I don't know. That could be the case. But could it be more likely that Nathanael was maybe in a worshipful state, maybe in a prayerful, meditative state, thinking about one of these passages, one of these promises? You got to remember, they're still under Roman occupation, and these promises that everyone will sit under their own vine and fig tree go back to the time of this major economic prosperity under the reign of King Solomon, where everybody had enough, where there was so much to go around that everybody had their own vine and fig tree. In other words, everybody had their own security, everybody had their own food source, they were secure, they were prosperous, and God had blessed them. So could it be that when Philip went to find Nathanael, Nathanael might have been studying these scriptures and imagining what it would be like to have that again? To not have to worry about where your next meal is going to come from. To not have to worry about whether somebody's going to come and try to forcefully take over your home and your land. Whether you're going to have to harvest your food and then give it as taxes to the Roman occupying forces. where everything is just yours, where everything is set right again, where everything is secure and safe. And maybe he's having this time of prayer and meditation. Maybe he's pondering these and imagining what it would be like if those promises became a reality. And here he brings them to Jesus. While you were under your fig tree, I saw you. Whoa. That would give me chills. That would cause me to pause. And that might be why he says, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. The Son of God, the King of Israel. We have to go back to the Old Testament once again. Psalm 2. Psalm 2 is typically viewed as a coronation song. A song that would be sung at the crowning of a new king. And this is what he says in verse 6. I have installed my king in Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. So if Nathanael is sitting here imagining what it would be like to be back in the time of the great kings of Israel, David, Solomon, and the prosperity and the security that they brought, and to know that Jesus knew that that's what he was wanting. And for them, then Nathanael to respond with this kingly messianic psalm, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. It all connects. That's who Jesus is. And Jesus goes on to say, you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree. You'll see greater things than that. If you're excited just because I knew your inner thoughts and desires, you're going to see much greater things than that. Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God descending and ascending on the Son of Man. Again, you have to know your Old Testament. We have to go back, this time to Genesis chapter 28. That's where Jacob is on the run from Esau, and he has this experience where he lies down at night with a pillow made of stone, and he has this dream. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and the south, and all peoples on the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I've done what I promised. So Jesus is having this back and forth with Nathanael. I saw you while you were sitting under your fig tree. Maybe mentally, maybe he's imagining a time of Israel's great prosperity. He says, you believe that I'm the Messiah, the Son of God, the King of Israel, because I said this. You're going to see greater things. Surely I tell you, you're going to see the heavens open and angels of God ascending and descending. Again, that's taking us back to before David and Solomon, before all of them. God made a promise to Jacob, to Israel, to his people, that I'm going to be with you, I'm going to bless you, and through you all the nations will be blessed. He says, Nathanael, you've got such a limited scope. Like, this is great that you're thinking about being prosperous and sitting under your own fig tree again. That's what I want for you. But that's too limited for what I'm here to do. That is such a limited view of what I came to do. I am going to bless all the nations of the world. All the nations of the earth will be blessed through Israel. You're going to see that happen. You're going to see God's presence fully made known in me. But more than that, Jesus says you're going to see, reference back to Jacob, angels of God ascending and descending on whom? On the Son of Man. Now, Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has this vision of these great empires rising and falling. And after the last great empire falls, he sees this vision here of the throne room of heaven. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion and will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So this is the insight that we're getting with this conversation back and forth between Jesus and Nathanael. I saw you while you were sitting under your fig tree. You're wanting Israel to be restored to its prosperity, to its power. And that's great, that's fine. But if you're going to follow me, my vision is much bigger. It's much more ancient than that. It's much broader than that. It's not just for Israel, it's for all the nations. And you're going to see the angels of God ascending and descending, not on Jacob, not on Israel, not on anybody in particular, but on the Son of Man, this divine being that represents humanity in the throne room of God and was given authority and dominion and power that reaches not just all of Israel, but across borders, across boundaries, across nations and languages. You're going to see something so much bigger than even you imagine, Nathanael. You're going to see so much bigger than that. If you're blown away by the fact that I know what you desire for yourself and for your country, great, cool. But you have no idea what's coming next. You better hang on. You better be prepared, because it's going to blow you away. So if you see a few different phrases repeat, we see this recommendation to follow. We see John pointing his disciples that way. We see Andrew coming to get Simon. We see Philip going to get Nathanael. We see this kind of questioning, like, are you sure? What do you want? Are you sure? Like, what can come out of Nazareth? And all of these kind of back and forth. And just that repeated reassurance, come and see, come and experience it for yourself. And they have this experience with Jesus. Going back to what I started with at the beginning, these personal recommendations of books and movies and interests and products that I have based on the recommendation of others. I don't know about you, but I've never won anybody over to Christ by posting something to Facebook, or by a clever tweet, or by an inspirational Instagram post, and probably not even by a video like this. But each one of us can probably think of the person or the people that brought us to Christ. Maybe it's your parents. Maybe they taught you the ways of Jesus from a young age, and you were just kind of always on board with this thing. That's awesome. Maybe it was in your teenage years and you had a youth minister who invested in you, who cared for you, who loved you, and taught you the Bible and taught you scriptures and made you feel like you belonged. And you came to know and to love Christ. That's awesome. Maybe it was a little bit later in life. Maybe you were an adult and maybe something finally broke in your heart. And maybe it was a family member, maybe a friend, maybe a preacher who led you on this journey and pointed you to Christ. That's amazing. People aren't won over by arguments. They're won over by relationships. I had a professor in college who would always say and remind us, what you win them with is what you win them to. And I'm not trying to win anybody over with clever arguments, with flashy videos. This isn't flashy. Or with cleverly worded tweets or inspirational Instagram posts. I'm not winning anybody over with that. But what I hope that I'm winning people over with is a loving, caring determination to follow Jesus no matter what. Not to scare them, you better follow or else. It's come and see. Just come and see. Come and try it. I want to leave you with this quote from G.K. Chesterton. And it's a quote that stuck with me. He says, "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. Following Jesus is one of the biggest decisions you can make in your life. And he invites each and every one of us to do that. He invites each and every one of us, like Philip, to follow me. But let's not let that stop there. Let's bring others along on the journey. We're not going to win them over with the flashiness and the prosperity gospel, and that if you follow Jesus, everything's going to be great and everything's going to be fantastic. No, but we are inviting people into a story that is bigger than themselves. We are inviting people to not follow us, but to follow Christ. To not amass our own following, but to win people over for the kingdom of heaven. Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. That's exactly what we are supposed to be doing. So if you are not following Jesus, won't you follow him? Start following him today. It's worth it. It's difficult, but it's worth it. If you know somebody in your life who hasn't made that decision, reach out to them. You don't have to win them over by compelling, convincing arguments. You win them over by relationship. Come and see. Oh, well, I'm not a church person. Just come and see. Oh, that Christianity thing is not for me. Come and see. Try it. Have this experience for yourself. And maybe it might change your mind. So I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into what it means to be a disciple of Jesus and his interactions with his first disciples that he calls here in the book of John. And as we go through this, I hope you have these close encounters with Christ for yourself and bring others along on the journey. So feel free to share this with others. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.